Deep Threat Sports Network fans, welcome back. Tonight you have Bryant and myself here. We're with another off-season episode going on here. To this episode, we're going to dive into some ACC conference review from the 2024 season, kind of like we did on our SEC review. Obviously, with the ACC, not as much to talk about, but there are some big hitters that we want to touch on here a little bit. First, Dave's still out. Dave's currently in the middle of a process of a move, just took a new job. Dude crossed the country now, moving his wife and his family. That's always a headache. Dave will be back. Do not worry. Dave will be back. He is still with us. But Bryant, man, it's good to have you back here doing another episode of this. How you been, man? You been going to some Mizzou basketball games, I assume?
Yes, unfortunately, but that is a talking point for you and Garrett Show on the Fallon Hard podcast. But hey, it's been good. Weather's been nice finally, so going to get my golf game shaped up and see how I can do better out there. But other than that, I've been doing great.
Good, man. Good to hear. Yeah, it is beautiful weather out here. Feels like we should be already watching some college football with the weather we got going on here in Missouri this week. But man, let's dive into this thing real quick. So in this episode, first, we're going to kind of do some ACC talking points, just some things that we took away, a little brief discussion. Then we're going to talk about our three top ACC players of the 2024 season. And then we're really going to dive into Bryant's two teams and my two teams that we want to hit on, some of the big hitters from the 2024 season that we feel like should get a little bit more emphasis than the rest of the conference. But first, right away, we're going to move on into the ACC talking points. And Bryant, one thing that I really want to kind of talk briefly here about first is welcome SMU into the Atlantic Coast Conference, their first year in this conference. And what a surprise they were, Bryant. They really came into this thing and hit it out of the park. What a hell of a first season for Rhett Lashley in the ACC.
Absolutely. I mean, they were the only undefeated team in conference play, 8-0, first team in the league, our first year in the league. Like you said, absolutely great first season for them. Kevin Jennings was a pretty dang good quarterback, and he wasn't even the starter to begin the season. Well, we'll touch on that a little bit more later. I'm sure everybody knows that. And then the running back, Rashard Smith, had over 1,300 yards. They were just flowing on offense, and they were one of the more dominant offenses in all of college football, not even just this conference. So yeah, props to them, and a lot of these players come back. So definitely be talking about them coming up in the 2025 as well.
Hey, I hate to sound like that guy, but man, Deep Threat Sports Network was actually all over kind of SMU coming into the season last year in that Atlantic Coast Conference. And man, they made us look good. They looked good. Came up short, but yeah, you're going to stress on that a little bit later in this episode. The next thing I want to touch on a little bit here, Bryant, is Clemson. Dabo Swinney doesn't go in the portal, and it was not a good start. We rode him pretty hard. We rode Clemson pretty hard on this network. That is one team that honestly, that I guess you could say we kind of swung and missed on. We didn't really swing and miss, but we didn't really think they were going to be a playoff team. And to be honest with you, Bryant, they really shouldn't have been a playoff team, I don't think. But hey, man, they found a way. Dabo finds a way. Didn't dip his toes in the portal, stuck with his guy, stayed true to what he was saying, and they kind of found a way for late season heroics. What'd you kind of take away from them? Were you impressed?
Towards the end of the season, I definitely was impressed. But like you said, we kind of rode them hard first 6, 7 games of the season, is because this was not the normal Clemson that we were used to seeing in the previous probably decade plus. And this was the year if they were going to be the dominant team in the ACC. I mean, the ACC was kind of down as a whole, so this was the year for Clemson to grab it and be that dominant force that they usually are, and they just weren't to begin the season. That being said, after probably week 6 or 7, they started hitting their stride a little bit. Cade Klubnik was a little bit better when holding on to the ball, not committing turnovers. They were leaning on Phil Moff for their running back, and Clemson always has a good defense, especially at the defensive front. So, once they finally went back to their Clemson football that we're used to seeing, they seemed to play better.
Yeah, man, and to your point, their defense was steady Eddie for that team for the most part. Cade Klubnik up and down, big games. You and I and Dave really talked a lot about how in those big games, Cade Klubnik really couldn't find his way. And in some of these games, he settled in a little bit. I still would love to see a real big stride in him coming into next season. Kind of really that stride I was hoping he would take last season. Yeah, not a bad season at all, but just not what Cade Klubnik was really supposed to do just yet. You know what I mean? But Phil Maffa, stud, that guy, he was up and down, hurt off and on all season long. But yeah, man, this is a Clemson team. To your point, Bryant, that the ACC was kind of up in the air for them to take, and they didn't take it. It felt like going into the season that Clemson and Miami were probably going to be the two headhunters. And obviously, a team like Florida State, you can never count out. But with that being said, let's spend a little bit of time here on Florida State because I know Brian's going to dive into Florida State a little bit later and really probably rip them apart. But yeah, Brian, this was not a Florida State team that we expected to see coming off a season the year before where they go in undefeated, come up short in that 14 playoff, looking for a little revenge in this season. Mike Norvell headhunting it looked like. And Bryant, this was ugly from week 0. This was all bad. 2-10, 1-7 in conference play. Keep it brief so you don't give no spoilers for later. But man, what else do you have to say about this?
It was so out of left field that it almost seemed like a fluke in a way. Like this Florida State? Like what is going on? I mean, usually bad years for them, they're still getting 7, 8 wins, and this was 2-10. Like if I could have put money on that at the beginning of the season, I wonder what those odds were. Unreal. I mean, just this is kind of the one you file away and just forget about it.
Yeah, man. DJ Uiagalelei coming in, transferring in from Oregon State, previously at Clemson before that. All bad, man. There was never anything I felt good about with this team. I think their defensive line kind of let them down a little bit from what they were expecting coming into the season. The skill position guys were way down. Just honestly, Bryant, not a good football team. Never had the confidence. And what's crazy out there is the sports books out there never really gave up on them either till the very end. Like every week, week 5, 6, 7, 8, it was like still favorable lines to go out there and bet against them because they just wouldn't give up on them. But man, this was one you want to let go out into the sunset, and we just never talk about again. But later in this episode, I can promise you Brian's got more to say. The last little talking point I want to talk about here a little bit, because I don't think they're going to be a team that we cover in our final 4 teams that we cover here on this episode. Georgia Tech. Let's talk a little bit about Brent Key and how damn good of a coach he is, Bryant, and how good this football team really was. I mean, I know it wasn't the best season in a way for some team standards, but this Georgia Tech team, man, they've been through it here in recent years, and it looks like they finally have the right guy at the coaching position. And let's just really focus on how they ended this season. Not necessarily the bowl game. I don't care about bowl games. I'm not a bowl game guy unless you're really in the playoffs. But their last 3 games of the season, Bryant, a 28-23 dub against Miami that really was one of the reasons Miami was held out of the playoffs, a 30-29 dub against NC State, and Bryant, their most notable game all season. I know they came up short. You ask some people, they probably should have won it. A few calls didn't really go their way, but they took Georgia Bulldogs to 8 overtimes. What a season this was for Georgia Tech. What a wrap-up it was for Georgia Tech.
Yeah, an incredible season for them. Like you mentioned, they've kind of been up and down as of recent years. And to be honest, they started off strong with that game in Ireland against Florida State. Yeah, Florida State ended up 2-10 and ended up being horrible. But at that point, they were number 10 in the country. It was on a neutral location, Ireland, but there was no Georgia Tech fans there, so it was basically an away game. Win that one, and then like you mentioned, stayed water throughout the season, and then finish out with 3 strong games. Honestly, that Georgia Tech and Georgia game may have been one of the better games of the season, in my opinion. Haynes King put the team on his back that game, even though they didn't come out with the win like you mentioned they should have. But he was a dog all season. Eric Singleton, even though he's no longer on the team, was an absolute great player for them at wide receiver. They also had a guy with last name King as well, the running back. I can't remember his name, but he was very, very, very good for them as well. Like you mentioned, they beat a Miami team, probably dashed Miami's hopes of making the playoff, and then also beat a really good NC State team as well. So yeah, props to Georgia Tech. This was a hell of a season for them. They've been good in years past, but this was kind of the year that they brought back the Georgia Tech football.
Yeah, Brian, this was a really good football team. Honestly, I'll be honest. I wish this team could have stayed together a little bit. I know Haynes King. I think he is done. If I remember correctly. To
Yep.
your point, that guy was a dog. Talk about a guy that went out there every week and really put it on the line. You would kind of read some injury reports going into the weeks of the game, and he'd always be on it, and he'd go find a way to play, man, and he'd still run the ball 15, 20 times a game, and just really carry that team. I think the other guy you're thinking of is actually Jamal Haynes. I
Jamal
could be
Haynes,
wrong,
that's what it
but
was.
the Haynes King, Jamal Haynes, the double Haynes backfield. Yeah, this was a pretty impressive football team, man. And Brent Key, I am really impressed with him. Former offensive lineman at Georgia Tech, I believe, and this is the right guy for the job. And for his sake, I hope it works out. I really, really like what he brings to the table for Georgia Tech.
Yeah, and for them to succeed in future seasons, I think obviously they're going to be kind of a feeder program to, the Power Four conferences that tend to poach players from programs like this, even though they're in a Power Four conference. They're going to have to find guys that are overlooked and or maybe get some transfers from like an Alabama or somebody that didn't play to kind of keep this progression up that they've shown this season and even the year before. So exciting times for Georgia Tech. I know they lost a lot of players, but they're trending in the right direction.
Wasn't to your point there a little bit? Wasn't Haynes King at Texas A&M at one point? I believe.
Yes, that's where they got him
So
from.
yeah, so I mean, you kind of to your point, you go in there and you get some guys that aren't playing, that aren't really living up to the hype necessarily at these real big power schools, and you kind of make them believers, and you let this team buy into what you're coaching, and you can have a hell of a run. I mean, just look at what SMU did, man. I mean, you can have a hell of a run with some of these guys. You just got to get them to buy in and believe in the process.
Mhm.
Moving on here, Bryant, let's move on to our three ACC players of the year. And honestly, for me, this wasn't that difficult, and I don't think it was that difficult for you either. And unfortunately, we are a network that usually goes against the chalk, and we try to reach outside of the box here a little bit. But the guys that we have on this list are all three quarterbacks, and they're all three from first team, second team, and third team, all conference of the ACC. Leading off our number one player of the year from the ACC, without a question for me, is Cam Ward. I mean, this guy threw for 4,300 yards. He was averaging 331 yards per game, 39 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. And for me, Brian, he was like just a guy that every time he stepped on the field, I had the utmost confidence that Miami was probably going to make something happen offensively.
And you got it written here down on our doc for the show that he would have absolutely ran away with the Heisman if it wasn't for a generational player as in Travis Hunter and one of the best running back seasons ever in college football. But definitely props to him. And he lived up to the hype. I mean, everybody thought Cam Ward was going to be a stud coming in when he transferred to Miami from Washington State. And he went out there and proved it. The guy was a game manager, but he also could take over a game and carry the team if he needed to. Consistently was running that offense up and down the field with ease. Really didn't have a whole lot of bad games, only 7 picks on the whole season. So, yeah, I think this was an easy pick for Cam Ward to be probably our top ACC player of the year if I were to grade them 1 through 3 here.
And this is a guy, Bryant, that comes out of high school as a zero-star recruit and goes to Incarnate Ward and really fights his way the hard way. So I love stories like that. This is a guy that went out and earned it, fought every single practice, every single season to continue to better himself. And you see him end up at Miami for his last season of college football. And I think this guy was the best quarterback in all of college football this season for me. The next player I want to talk about here, who also you could make a case for was one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football season, is Kyle McCord. Brian, this guy threw for nearly 4,800 yards, averaging over 360 yards per game, 34 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. And man, this was a guy that had nobody believing in him, tons and tons of doubt. They pretty well shipped him out of Ohio State, takes a step down to Syracuse, and plugs right in, Bryant, and plays for Fran Brown this season, his first year at Syracuse, and honestly lights it up. And I think there was a point in time where Ohio State fans, I know they went out and won a national championship, but let's not lose sight of the fact that mid-season, some of these Ohio State fans out there were like, holy shit, maybe it wasn't Kyle McCord. We would love to have him back and get rid of what we got.
Absolutely. And Syracuse is a basketball school. They're not a football school. I mean, everybody, when they think of Syracuse, they think of Coach Boeheim and Carmelo Anthony. They don't think of football. Kyle McCord went in there with, no-name wide receivers and pretty much, unknown weapons on the offensive side of the football and went out there and threw 40, 100 yards, averaging almost 370 yards per game, which is insane. Credit to him. He took the prototypical step down to Syracuse and went out and balled out. The only issue I had with him was he kind of turned the ball over at the most crucial times, and I think that kind of limited Syracuse in some wins. But he was really the best player on that team by far. He went out and showed it, and was one of the better quarterbacks in the country. And touching on him a little bit, he's actually shooting up a lot of draft boards in the NFL coming up in this draft here in April. So we'll talk about that in a show at a later date. But Kyle McCord is going to have a future in the NFL, and obviously he showed out this year what he can do.
Well, and I'm pretty sure Brian too. I mean, he's really the reason that this Miami football team wasn't in the playoffs. This dude
Absolutely. That was
showed
the final
up,
dagger.
I mean, on a massive stage, and he said, "Hey, man, hold my beer. I'm going to show everybody what I'm all about right here. This is the biggest stage of my career so far this season, and I'm going to let this thing fly." And he spun it around and had a hell of a game. And yeah, he's probably the reason that Miami did not make the playoffs. Brian, I'm going to go ahead and
Absolutely.
let you talk about our last ACC Player of the Year here.
Our last ACC Player of the Year, another quarterback, and everybody can probably guess it. We're going with Kevin Jennings. He had almost 3,300 yards through the air, 23 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions, and added 5 on the ground with 350 yards rushing. He was a dynamic Lamar Jackson type player in this offense. And what's wild is I kind of mentioned earlier on in the show, he wasn't even the starter. They had Preston Stone labeled as QB1 coming into week 1, and he was a really good quarterback too. I mean, he put up really good numbers for them the year before, and everybody thought it was going to be Preston Stone. But he got benched in week 1, and here comes Kevin Jennings. Really became a factor in this offense, after the BYU game, even though that was a tough loss for them. But Kevin Jennings, he did have a few kind of like Kyle McCord dagger type turnovers that really only came to fruition in the last 2 games of the season. But he did it all for this team. Cam Ward like type player as far as the guy that can go on the field and absolutely dominate and run that offense up and down the field. And he showed it this season. Credit to him. Really had no experience coming into this season being a high caliber starting quarterback, and he definitely showed out.
Yeah, I mean, what a first season for him in a Power Four conference like this, and to really kind of catapult that team into that next level, and really made it a chance for them to make some noise in the playoffs. And it really is a damn shame how you kind of saw it all end for him this season against Penn State in the playoff game. Just a wicked environment, by far and away the craziest environment he's ever been a part of. So really, really tough out for Kevin Jennings. But I can promise you, especially 3 quarters of the way through that season, there was no team that wanted to line up and play defense against him on the other side of the football, because he was really, really damn good. And I'm really looking forward to what he brings to the table in 2025, Bryant. I know we're going to kind of do an episode down the road where we talk about maybe some ACC impact players coming into the season, and he will definitely be high up on that list.
Absolutely. And we talked about numerous times, even probably since that BYU game, the SMU is legit. I mean, we were picking them as a sleeper in the college football playoff if they made it, and they did. Obviously, like you said, they ran into a buzzsaw there in Happy Valley against Penn State, but we were high on them all season. They definitely showed out on both sides of the football, but especially the offensive side with Kevin Jennings and company.
I'm still one that looks back to that Penn State SMU game, and Kevin Jennings rolls out to his right on their first drive right after getting the ball back, and they go and he throws it to the tight end in the corner of the end zone, and he just comes up and doesn't make the catch. But Brian, I'm telling you right now, man, they go up 7-0 in that football game. It might be a totally different conversation for Kevin Jennings and how this thing ended for him in 2024. Really exciting stuff for what SMU has coming back next season. So let's go ahead and move into our final segment of this episode. And kind of like we said a couple of weeks ago when we dropped our SEC episode, these aren't going to be real long episodes. We're just going to kind of get in the lab here and give you guys some stuff and really just focus on what were the big topics from these conferences in the 2024 season. So Brian's going to talk about 2 teams. I'm going to talk about 2 teams, probably alternate here. Obviously, we're going to feed in on each other's teams here a little bit and add some stuff. But Brian, what's the first team that you want to talk about from the ACC in 2024 and really dive deep into?
Yeah, I kind of followed along with our SEC show here, and I picked a winner and a loser, and I'm going to go with the winner first, and I'm just going to dive right back into the team we kind of just talked about with SMU. Obviously, we talked about Kevin Jennings and how good he was, but Rashard Smith at the running back position, and they had a trio of wide receivers in Jordan Hudson, Keyshawn Smith, and Roderick Daniels. Those guys alone put up almost over 5,500 yards of offense this season. Absolutely incredible. Like I mentioned, he wasn't even the starter week 1 with Kevin Jennings, and they benched him. I don't really remember the reasoning why, but it paid dividends. They were the only undefeated team in conference play at 8-0, 11-3, and like we mentioned, the wheels kind of fell off there at the end of the season with the loss to Clemson in the ACC title game. Very close game. Almost came back and won after being down big, and then running into that Penn State team there at home. But to come into the ACC your first year, go undefeated in conference play, make the title game and the playoff. Credit to these guys. And like you mentioned a little bit just now, all these players I mentioned are coming back to SMU next season. they're going to be a team to watch and probably highly ranked in the preseason and an early favorite to at least make the playoff and maybe make some noise. So SMU, I think, is a definite winner from this year as far as 2024 ACC season was concerned.
Well, and I think too, Bryant, you look back, and I imagine that they were an underdog in at least 4 or 5 of their games, especially going into the season. And they had wins against a ranked, pretty damn good Louisville football team. They beat a
Mm-hmm.
good Duke football team. They beat Pitt when they were ranked at one point. I mean, this was a really good football team. You know, not the hardest of schedules in the world. So maybe that's why you kind of look back and they did get the nod into the playoffs and they did go 11-3. There's a lot of critics out there that like, hey man, they played two good teams at the end. They lost to both of them. But I'm here to tell you right now, they were 100% in that Clemson football game. They gave Clemson all they wanted, and if you eliminate, I think it was 21 points off turnovers for Penn State, and
Yep.
that's a lot. But if you eliminate that, that's a totally different football game, man. That is a totally different game, and they're in that. It was all about momentum, and like I said a second ago, by far and away the biggest environment that Kevin Jennings and this SMU football team has ever stepped foot on and played in. So this was a really good reality check, kind of a gut punch, maybe something to build off of going into the 2025 season.
Yeah, absolutely. And they know what they can build off of and the type of team that they can be. So this will definitely be a stepping stone like season for them. Another game I want to mention that was kind of made me believe in SMU and picked them as a winner this season. Even though they lost, they took BYU to the ropes in Provo, and there was no hardly any teams that did that this season. I mean, BYU beat the brakes off K-State in Provo, and SMU went on the road early on in the season when Kevin Jennings really wasn't, the didn't really have his feet underneath him quite yet, and they showed out even though they lost. So that kind of cemented them that they were going to be a good team, and they definitely showed that the rest of the season. So winner SMU ACC this past season.
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree with you with that. Agree with you on that. There's no way anybody out there can go on the flip side of that and say it wasn't a winner for SMU. A team that I want to talk about here a little bit is Louisville. Louisville had a 9-4 season, 5-3 in conference play, and probably the most notable win of the season was a 33-21 victory against Clemson, ranked 11 at the time when they played. And obviously, Clemson was a damn good football team. And I think most people would be surprised, Bryant, that you and I aren't going to talk about Clemson when we talk about the ACC conference here. They're not one of our 4 teams. Spoiler alert on these remaining 2. But this was a really damn good Louisville football team. They had a top 25 offense in the country. It was a great season by Tyler Shuck. People call him all kinds of different names out there on his last name. He transferred in, and he was a really damn good quarterback. But one thing I want to focus on when it comes to Louisville football is Jeff Brown. I'm here to make a case right now that I think Jeff Brown is one of the top 10 football coaches in the country. This was a guy that went out and won the Big Ten with Purdue. This is a really, really good football coach. He went 17-9 in his last 2 seasons at Purdue, Bryant. That's unheard of for Purdue football. Purdue football is not notable in the Big Ten, especially this new age Big Ten when it's really top heavy on those main teams. This is a really damn good coach, and he is what they are kind of starting to call maybe a little bit of a quarterback whisperer. He gets transfer quarterbacks that come in, and he lights it up with them, and you're going to see Miller Moss come in this next season with Louisville. This is a guy that recruits well, gets his guys to buy into the process. They believe in everything that he brings to the table, and they are just really damn solid. They're a team that nobody wants to go play on a Saturday afternoon.
I watched Louisville teams and the Purdue teams that Brom coached, before he came here, and they hardly ever do anything wrong. It seems
Very
like
disciplined. Yes.
they're very disciplined, and that's what makes them very good on both sides of the football. They don't make mistakes. Tyler Shaw was one of the best quarterbacks this year as far as taking care of the football. They don't fumble, and they cause a lot of turnovers on defense. So I really do think a lot of this success, yeah, the players played well, but Jeff Brom is one of the best coaches in college football. I definitely agree with you. I don't think he gets as much hype as he deserves, and I think
No.
you'll see that come to fruition here in the next few seasons. I think, like you mentioned, the Miller Moss pickup was big for them. I think they're going to be really good in 25, this season. So, this season back to 24, Ja'Cory Brooks was a stud. Tyler Shaw, like I mentioned, took care of the ball and led that offense efficiently. Credit to them. I don't think many people had Louisville on their radar either to start this season as far as the ACC was concerned. So definitely want to give the props to Jeff Brom. I think they're much needed, and we'll see if he can keep this rolling. But if there's any coach I think in college football that I think can keep the ball rolling, is definitely him.
Well, and in 2023, Brian, there was nobody that believed in Louisville out there. It ended up being a late sleeper team that people were talking about really late in the season. Like, holy shit, man, they're showing up and showing out. And I'll be
Mhm.
the first to kind of pat myself on the back here, as I was a believer in Louisville in 2023, believer in Louisville in 2024. I'm going to be a believer in Louisville in 2025. And as long as Jeff Brom's there, I'm going to be a believer in Louisville. I think he gets the absolute most out of his players, and I'm really impressed. I love watching them because of what you just said. They're disciplined. They have a game plan. They go out, they execute, and you're going to get everything they have every single Saturday. And that's why I love watching him. Yeah, man, Tyler Shuck goes out, throws for over 3,100 yards. Ja'Cory Brooks transfers in. He's an over 1,000-yard receiver this season. This is just proof that guys come in and they play for him, and they believe in what he's doing. They trust the process. And I am a firm believer in Louisville, like I said, as long as he is around. And not to mention, they have a great environment. They have a really underrated environment there in Louisville when you go play there on a Saturday. I'll be the first to admit that I didn't realize how good of an environment it really was until about 2 seasons ago. I mean, they get up.
I mean, you look back at the Lamar Jackson seasons, he was there. Obviously, they were showing up to watch him. They didn't really probably care so much about the football team, but that you're definitely right. One of the more underrated um, environments in college football. Well, maybe not college football, but ACC. You know, there's better ones in the ACC. Obviously, this is not no Death Valley like LSU or Clemson or Florida State for sure, but you know, definitely underrated. And I think a lot of teams get blindsided a little bit when they go there to Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, to play these guys. The dig I have on Louisville here a little bit, and this kind of goes back to Jeff Brom a little bit, is it seems like they show up for the big games every single time. They're going to play them tight, but they play like Syracuse or Boston College or something, and it's way too close. It's like there's no in between. It seems like that's my only dig on him a little bit. And it was the same way with Purdue. They would always almost beat Ohio State, and then the next week they lose to Northwestern. So if he can clean that up a little bit, I think definitely we'll see a better record this next season from Louisville.
Yeah, man. Jeff Brom, to your point about Purdue and almost beating Ohio State, he was like the highlighted term of spoiler makers for Purdue when he was
Hmm.
there. And last thing on Purdue or Louisville and Jeff Brom here is I have saw another network out there. Not going to name drop them, but I saw that they had put out like a top 25 coaches list twice, two different guys for this network, and neither one of them had Jeff Brom in the top 25. And I'm here to tell you that is the most asinine thing that I've ever seen in my life. That is a completely uncredited list unless Jeff Brom's name is on that list. That was really, really bad stuff, in my opinion, out there. All right, Brian, let's move on and talk about your last team from the ACC that you want to hit on. And I mean, this is good luck, man. Good luck.
Yeah.
Buckle up.
So my loser of the ACC season is obviously the Florida State Seminoles. Some people know this, not a lot of people know this. I would say Florida State is my second favorite team, obviously behind Mizzou. I have a good buddy who absolutely is a diehard Florida State fan, and it's kind of rubbed off on me a little bit. So I follow them a little bit, but not as closely as other team as Mizzou. So I was kind of excited for them coming into this season. Obviously, I thought they'd have a chip on their shoulder after probably being robbed of a college football playoff appearance the year before after a 13-1 season after their quarterback got injured. But they came out and they had a tough loss against Georgia Tech, and I was like, you know what, I can see that happens. It is what it is. But then they rattle off three more losses. Then they beat a California team that was not good, and then they rattle off six more losses. And then their only other win was a bottom feeder or a feeder pig game against an FCS team. Utter disaster. 1-7 in the conference, 2-10 overall. And I mentioned it earlier when we were talking about them in our topics to talk about is it almost seems like it was a fluke because Florida State has great players. They're top 10 in the recruiting every single year. They had guys. They had Toafili running back. They had a running back transfer from Alabama. DJ was supposed to be the big, great quarterback from Oregon State transferring in. Their defensive line was stacked. Patrick Payton, so many players on that side of football too that can make plays, and it was just like they were going through the motions every game, every drive. It was just hard to watch. Now I think you put a lot of this on DJ. I don't even want to say his name. I'll just call him DJ Uyunglele, I think is how you pronounce it. Um, I do truly think that guy is horrible. I don't know how
Yeah.
he's still in college football. I think he transferred again somewhere else. I don't really know where it is. I kind of just stopped paying attention to him.
I
Um,
think he's done, but I quit following him. I'm pretty
think he's
sure he's
done.
done.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
he's
he's
done.
going to play. he's going to play in the arena of football, maybe. But I truly think a lot of it was on his shoulders. I mean, he was expected to go in there and, be this guy that can facilitate the football, not turn it over. He didn't really do that a whole lot when he was at Oregon State. And he was really good there. So they put a lot of chips on in his basket, and it did not work. So they benched him, and they bring in Brock Glenn. Granted, Brock Glenn is a young guy, hasn't really played a whole lot, and he got thrown to the Wolves. And I think he had 2 games under 100 yards passing. Well, then they go to another guy, their freshman who since transferred in Chromachek. He did better, but it was against an FCS team, and then had also had a couple games where he had one under 100 yards passing and one under 200 yards passing. So, you know, like I said, it seemed like a fluke because they got all the players. This came out of nowhere. Like they mentioned, they were top 10 in the country to start the season. All the hype was there, and it was just bad football all around. I think also part of this has to go on Mike Norvell. Obviously, the coach takes the fall for a lot of this, and I think he tried to keep his team motivated throughout the season, and it just wasn't working. Which obviously, if I was on that team too, I'd probably have been checked out. But let's see if they can turn it around. Like I mentioned, they have a good recruiting class and they have a bunch of players. So a bunch of good players in that team. I mean, they recruit Florida very well, and that's the best team. That's the best state to recruit from in college football, in my opinion. So if any team can turn it around, I think it's Florida State for sure. But this year was bad, bad, bad. And as a Mizzou fan, I'm used to bad football seasons, but this is not good. And like you mentioned earlier, this is one you kind of just put in the memory bank, or maybe you try to take out of the memory bank and just try to forget about it all you can.
This is every Florida State fan, man. Lick their fingers, grab the page, and turn it.
Yeah,
We just completely forgot this ever happened. But one thing for me that I think kind of happened to Florida State this season, Bryant, is I think they had a lot of chips in the Cam Ward basket going into transfers,
yep,
going pre 2024 season, post 2023 in the transfer portal. And I know Florida State and Miami were both in on Cam Ward late in the game. And Florida State kind of hung around and didn't really make any moves at that quarterback position, Bryant. And then when Cam Ward all of a sudden picks Miami, they were like, oh, shit. DJU it is, man. Come on in. And I think what they just needed from DJU was just to be a game manager. That just manage a little bit of football. We don't need anything special. But DJU throughout his whole entire career was very much so an up and down guy. He was very much so a momentum guy. And when things were bad, they were really bad. And it really showed its ugly head in this season with the Florida State Seminoles. And to your point, they played 3 quarterbacks, man. Luke Kromenjoke, Brock Glenn, DJU, really, really bad from all 3 of them. I do think, Luke Kromenjoke can probably go somewhere else and have a little bit better of a career than what he was showing at Florida State. I think he's got a little bit more in the tank than what he was able to use. But one thing, too, Brian, about Florida State that I want to touch on a little bit is they also weren't very good at the receiver position. Not that DJU was good because he wasn't, not that either of the other quarterbacks were elite because they weren't. But, man, they had a lot of drops. I watched quite a bit of Florida State football this season, actually, just because I was so appalled at how bad it was. And, man, they were really bad at receiver. A lot of drops. The leading receiver at 519 yards, and after that, they go down to 311. Just nothing works for them, Bryant. Nothing. And to your point, this does come back on Mike Norvell. And I think because it was so damn bad, I think Mike Norvell has no option but to go out and have a really damn good season this season, or his name, might be on the chopping block.
Mm-hmm. And you hit on some points I was going to kind of touch on here to finish this up. Is they got really vanilla on offense because of the receivers not being able to catch the ball and move the football down the field that way. They leaned on their running backs way too much. I mean, Toafili had a pretty good football season as far as running backs were concerned, but he had so many carries, so many dump off passes because nobody else was open, and teams were just keying in on the check down passes and the running attack, and they were not having to worry about DJ passing the ball or whoever it was passing the ball through the air, and it definitely showed out because they were just going 3 and out, or they'd get a first down and then they were punting. It was just constant bad drives from them on the offensive side of football. And I think that's truly what did them in because their defense was not horrible, but they were on the field so
They
much.
live on the
They could
field, dude.
they could not they could not stay off the field, and the offense was not scoring touchdowns or whatever. I mean, I didn't check into it, but I would say probably Florida State's defense was top 5 in time of possession on the field as far as concerned, them on the field. So, you know,
Well,
it was bad in multitude ways, and they definitely got to figure something out. I think they got to revamp this entire offensive scheme and try to be like the team they were just the year prior.
15.4 points per game was Florida
Yeah,
State's
it's
offense.
horrible.
One of the worst in the entire college football country. And moving on from that is going to be the exact opposite. I'm going to go over to make my final team that we're going to talk about, the Miami Hurricanes. And we're going to talk about 43.9 points per game and how they had the best offense in the country. And Bryant, let's combine these two teams for a second. You put Mike Norvell on Miami. Miami's in the college football playoff. I am a firm believer, and I said this over and over and over throughout the season. You said it over and over and over throughout the season. There's some coaches out there that no matter what you give them, if you pull up in a Lamborghini, they're going to drive it like a Prius. Mario Cristobal was that guy. We said it over and over. I can't express that enough. We knew it was coming. And what's he do, Brian? He does it. He pulls the Mario Cristobal. He pulls the Mario Cristobal, shits the bed against Syracuse, is the reason they don't go to a college football playoff because he's such a bad coach. Now, on the flip side of this guy can flat out recruit. This guy can flat
Absolutely.
out recruit. And I'm a firm believer, too, that Miami no longer recruits itself anymore. I don't think Miami is, what we used to see back in what was that, 2000, 2001, 2002, when they were the U, man. Everybody knew who the U was. Miami has some really dark times here in the previous years, and Mario Cristobal has kind of brought them back into a little more relevance. But I also think it's because they got some money. They had some big name players come in, and those guys can just take care of business on their own. Hence, AKA Cam Ward. I mean, this guy comes in and lights it up. And we talked earlier about how he was our number one player of the ACC of the year. And that is what led them to this. They had studs at the receiver position. I mean, I could go on for days about how many good receivers they had. Restrepo and George were unbelievable. And then you get a transfer running back in Damian Martinez to come in and rush for 1,000 yards. A really damn good football team. And I'm here to tell you too, Brian, they had way too much talent on the defensive side of the ball for them to be as bad, really, as they were on defense. And I'm not saying that they were bad, but they were not good. With the names they had on defense, they should have been a whole hell of a lot better. With the teams that they were playing week in and week out, they should have been a whole hell of a lot better. They should have never in a million years allowed Syracuse to go and score 42 points on them to end the season when they're trying to make a college football playoff push. Never in a million years should that have happened. I'm still jaded. I'm still pissed off because I wanted to see Miami in the playoffs because I wanted to see what that offense could do. If they get into the playoffs, Bryant, you would have single-handedly watched the best offense in college football. And I wanted everybody to really see what Cam Ward and that offense could do in the playoffs against these other high-caliber teams. I'm still pissed off. I still think Mario Cristobal, I damn near would have fired him if I was the Miami AD at the end of the season because I truly think this all comes back to him.
Oh, 100%. I truly think Mario Cristobal is a horrible X's and O's coach. If I'm him, I'm just kind of the guy that's calling timeouts and stuff and letting my offensive coordinators handle it. But he always has to have his hand in the pot, and it always seems to bite him at the worst time, and it definitely did this season. It did the year before. And I honestly probably would bet on it to happen again this coming season too, whoever they roll out there and play. Like you mentioned, that Syracuse game was the dagger. Well, they also had a horrible game against Georgia Tech, almost lost two other times against Virginia Tech and Cal. Had a shootout game against Louisville. I mean, I think this falls directly on the shoulders of Mario Cristobal and also a lot on the defense. Yeah, they weren't horrible, but they let up a lot of points. And there's a reason why Louisville is or not Louisville, Miami is first in points per game is because they had to most of the games. They had
They
to score
had to.
40 points to win. So Mario Cristobal's got to figure this out. If he's honestly, if he has a shit season this coming year, he's probably on the chopping block because he's had top notch players these past 2 years and has just lost it. He's got to figure it out. He's got to find a defensive coordinator that can figure it out on that side of the football.
I
And
have an answer, Brian. I have an answer right here, real quick, though. Not to cut you off, but if you couldn't do it last year,
you're
what
not
the hell
going
does this
to.
eight? How the hell are you going to do it this year?
Yeah.
You aren't going to get a better offense than what you just had. That's why I'm serious when I said if I'm their AD, I'm taking a step back and I'm like, okay, in 2023, all you had to do was knee it, and we don't lose to Georgia Tech, but you don't knee it, and they beat us.
Run the ball and
And
fumble.
we come in this season, and we have the best offense in the country. We average 537 yards per game, damn near 44 points per game. We have the best quarterback in the country. We have first-round receiver talent, one of the best. I could go on. What if you didn't do it in 2024? What in the hell makes anybody think they're going to do it in 2025?
Absolutely.
I'm pissed. Like, I'm still so pissed because this team just came up short. And I look back and think about this Louisville football game. What an electric football game that was. But you're up big at halftime. What was Mario's message at halftime? How does Louisville even get back in that game? Congratulations. Yes, you're lucky you had Cam Ward, because if you truly had any other quarterback in the country in the 2024 season in college football, you're not winning that football game. Every time the guy stepped on the field after the defense blew it, Cam Ward steps right back on the football field, takes them straight down in 4, 3, 4, 5 plays, and they score again. He's like, okay, now defense, Mario, go out there, coach this defense, get one stop. Let me go out there and score some more points. We'll go out here and blow this thing back open like I did in the first half. Well, they don't. So he has to go back out on the football field, go back down the field and score again. This is a damn shame that we even have to talk about how Miami Hurricanes were not in the football playoffs, and it solely falls back on Mario Cristobal. I'm 99% sure that they made a coaching change on defense. I'm pretty sure
Yes,
they did. And you can fire as many coaches as you want, man. It's every season you do some dumbass shit, and this was another season where you truly dropped the ball and had the best team you're probably ever going to have at Miami.
Yeah, and the college football shit runs uphill, not downhill. And Mario Cristobal has a lot of question marks coming to 2025. Do I think he can handle them? Absolutely not. But time will tell. But you just hit the nail on the head. They had the team. This was the year. And honestly, Miami could have had a worse record. In my opinion, they lost Virginia Tech. Also, my other opinion is they probably should have lost to Cal. They got gifted a few calls. So they easily could have been 8-5 and 4-4 in the conference, and we would be having an even worse conversation. So, yeah, I don't know what to do. I would take a deep thought, like you said, if I'm the AD of Miami, and try to maybe think about moving on from Mario Cristobal. But I don't know what you do. I mean, they were really good, but
I feel like if you're Miami, though, like, don't you think that there would be coaches that want to come to Miami? Maybe I'm
absolutely.
wrong in that assessment, but I feel like there would be coaches that would be not necessarily knocking at the door, but a lot of guys wouldn't turn that down. I would think that obviously if you're a top 5 or 6 team in the SEC, top 4 team in the Big Ten, you're probably saying no. Or if you're Dabo, you're saying no. But I feel like there's a lot of coaches out there that would probably not turn that job down. It's a good job, man. You got good
It
money.
really is. Endless
The
money.
only thing that sucks about them is your football field sucks ass, and it's not even on
Yeah.
campus.
It's
Fix
a nice
that.
stadium, but
Yeah, fix that, and it'd be even better. But I really do think that this would have been a good job, and I think that there's better options out there than Mario Cristobal.
I absolutely agree. I can't remember off the top of my head. Where was he at before Miami? He did the same shit.
Was he? He
Was
wasn't
it
at Oregon. No,
Virginia?
I'm thinking.
I
Where
can't
was
remember.
Mario Cristobal at before that? Because we talked about it mid-season last year
I
where he
gotta
was
pull
at
that up.
before, and he did the same
And
thing.
it was the same stuff. He just basically was a dumbass all the time, and it
Wasn't
came
it
back.
Oregon?
It was Oregon. Was it
Yeah, he was
Oregon?
at Oregon. He was
Yes, it
at
was
Oregon, and I'm
Oregon.
pretty sure there
It
was
was at
another
Oregon.
game that they didn't
Yes,
take a knee, and they ended up losing a football game.
it
I'm
was
like
Oregon.
99% sure of that. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
I just looked it up. It was Oregon.
Okay. Here we go, Brian. You didn't win in 2024 with that offense. You didn't win when you were at Oregon.
And you had Bo
What
Nix.
what are we doing?
Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like this train of Mario Cristobal is like the definition of insanity. You do the same
I
thing
don't
over and over, nothing's going to change.
I don't think he had Justin Herbert.
He had Herbert, and I think he had Nix for 1 year.
So you mean to tell you mean to tell me that you had 2 first round, 3 if you count Cam Ward, 3 first round quarterbacks, and you still can't find your name atop of college football ranks? This is bad, man. This is a hell of a track record that I wouldn't want to be a part of. I wouldn't want my name attached to that track record. How do you
Absolutely
convince
not.
guys to come play for you anymore? Like, how do you, if you're the next great thing on, the transfer portal, and Bryant, you're the number 1 transfer quarterback, and I'm Mario Cristobal, and I call you, hey man, come play for me, and Okay, what are you going to do for me? Well, we're not going to win, but we're not going to do, Brian. I'm going to F this up for you at some point. But I'll
Hmm.
tell you what I will do. I'll get you some good stats and I'll get you in the first round, but we're not going to win. So I guess it really comes down to what you want. And
I
maybe
think
that's why guys want to play for him because it does
I
chalk
think the
some
money
numbers
I
up.
think the money bags down in Miami is also a big factor because I would say I don't really know for sure, but I would say Miami's probably top 10 in NIL fund. And there's a lot of big cash in Miami, and I'm sure they're feeding a lot of it to these players. So that's probably part of it as well.
AKA Carson Beck.
Yeah, exactly. So, like I mentioned, a lot of question marks coming to 2025. I don't think you can have a much better team than they had last year. I don't see them being better, especially with Carson Beck. That's a topic for another episode.
Yeah, may or may not be a hot take, but anybody out there listening that's a Miami fan, I'm here to tell you first right now, Carson Beck's no Cam Ward. So good luck. And yeah, like Brian said, we will do a full ACC 2025 preview at some point. And I'm sure Brian and I will be back on this topic because every time we bring up Miami, we really lay it all out there on Mario Cristobal. So that's all I have for my teams. That's all Brian has for his teams. And that's really all we have for our ACC 2024 review. Brian, before we get on out of here, is there anything else you would like to add?
Not really. I thought we touched on a lot of the big time players and teams, the winners and losers of this program or of this conference. Obviously, like with the SEC show we did, there's a lot of teams in the middle, like the Clemsons and the Dukes and those types of teams we could have talked about that had good and or bad seasons. But they weren't true, really definite winners or definite losers. So we kind of set them aside for further conversation down the road. But I don't really have much else to add really with this conference.
No, and to your point, the only other team that I think we could have touched on is if we had more time would have been Duke because Manny Diaz comes in year one, taking over for Mike Elko at Duke, and has a really damn good season again. They win quite a few games, and they are outperforming the expectations at Duke. They are very happy with the way things are going at Duke, especially after losing Riley Leonard, and you come in
Mhm.
this season and don't have him. So really good things for Duke too. And yeah, maybe they're a team that we'll touch on. Maybe they'll have a bright future in 2025 in this ACC conference as well. I do think this was probably a fairly wide open conference again. So looking forward to that 2025 preview episode. Make sure you guys tune in later in the off season to that. We will be here for all your key and important details in the ACC conference. But hey, this was tons of fun, Bryant. I love doing these reviews. On our next review, I don't know what to. I have to look at the note here, Bryant, but I don't know if we have the Big 12 or the Big 10. But we will for sure have one of those conferences for you on our next episode. We look to get back in the next week or two, kind of spacing things out, kind of hectic with all the other sports going on that we're covering as well. Make sure you tune into all of our good stuff out there on Deep Threat Sports Network. Once again, that's Bryant. I'm Collin. You can follow us on X at DT_sports_, Instagram Deep Threat Sports with a Z, Facebook Deep Threat Sports Network, TikTok Deep Threat Sports Network, YouTube, Spotify at Deep Threat Sports. Hey, Bryant, tons of fun, man. We'll see you next time, buddy. Peace.